He rode across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm pretty sure it was the Atlantic Pacific, one of the two. But he rode from somewhere to Rio, right? Somewhere here to Rio, okay? Dude's fucking nuts. Awesome dude, like coolest guy ever. But what he actually did and taught me, and this sat with me forever, was he was sitting in this little shitty boat. So they had these little boats that they'd row in, okay? So there's a couple of them in a boat at a time. And they would do 2 hours on, 90 minutes off. That was their shift, non-stop, 24 hours a day. So you imagine rowing through the ocean. Have you guys ever been out like deep sea in the ocean? Gets a little choppy, right? A little bit choppy. And he's in this little boat with just this one capsule, 2 hours rowing, right? 90 minutes to sleep and eat and do all that sort of stuff, right? And he was there and he said his ass was blistered, his fucking muscles were wasting away, he's got salt wounds and all that sort of shit all over him. And he went and he curled up in his little thing, he's just thinking, fuck this, I'm fucking over it, playing all those head games. And then he decided, something came to him and he rode up on the top of the wall. So he's looking at it, he's like, thank you for allowing me to suffer. Because suffering is actually a privilege for us, because suffering gives us perspective, it gives us context, and it gives us something to reflect on. And most of all, it gives us learning, which is fucking awesome. It's like, how cool is that? And that's the most beautiful thing about life, is that the more we suffer, the more, it's like we can't lose. Because even when you're suffering, you're going to win. Even when it's difficult, you're going to win. And it always, every single time, we always come out on top. On some way, shape or form, there is always something beautiful to be taken out of life. Any comments on that?
The obstacle is the way.
Yes. Totally. And living in the present with that. Actually, I'm going to talk about that next. When we start getting really anxious and jacked up, right? It's because we're living in effect the wrong time. So there are 3 times. So we have the present, we have the now, right? Guess how much time we spend in the now every single day? Most of us, 2 parts of fuck all. Because what are we thinking about? We're thinking about banging some chick. We're thinking about what we're doing on Friday night. We're thinking about smashing a few beers, what we're going to eat, where our next meal is coming from. My boss is a fucking prick, right? All these things that we're thinking about. We're most of the time living in the future. On the flip side, who's ever had a conversation in the shower with themselves after they've had an argument with someone? And we're running through all the things that we should have said. It is like, if I just hit him with this zinger, I would have won that argument. And I would have shown him. And we go through and we start running these scenarios through our heads. We start running these things through our minds. And we start trying to change the past, which is pretty fucking stupid if you think about it, right? But we live most of the time between the past and the future. Now, I'm going to focus on the future here. So there's a saying, which is depression is living in the past and anxiety is living in the future. Whenever we start getting anxious, we're not getting anxious over shit which is happening now. We're getting anxious over stuff which is about to happen. Now, if you look from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. But the thing is that we live in Australia here, right? We live in the developed world. We don't actually have that much bad stuff that can really happen, like really, really, truly bad stuff. If you look in the grand scheme of things, yes, there are things that are difficult and whatnot, granted, and context is everything, but most of the time we have it pretty good. But we start living in the future and we start fretting about things. And the time when anxiety occurs is when we perceive a problem, but we haven't taken action on it. Does that make sense? It's when we've thought up of a scenario or a difficulty, but we haven't actually gone through and done the action for it. Who here gets anxiety, by the way? Who here gets anxious, stressed, all that sort of shit? What are the things that we get anxious about?
Outcomes.
Outcomes? Yep.
I sort of like always get a nervous energy before a call or a close in my business.
What about the call or the close are you nervous about?
That's a good question. It's just a feeling I get, but I just turn it into excitement, get excited about it.
So with the call,
So like, our nervous system, I get nervous.
Yeah.
Why? It just comes to me. It's like, oh, here we go again. You're going to close like a mofo, like you always do. Like I just know it's going to go well. Or,
Yeah.
future pacer, but then I just walk in and yell at you. So,
I used to find when I was doing sales that the nervousness would come from the fear of rejection.
right.
And there's a fear there. It could be. It could be completely different.
I have thousands of rejections. I love it. I just love it.
That's I love that. That's fucking cool. Jareth.
Fear of not meeting expectations of not just yourself, but most importantly with others.
Yeah.
Not meeting their expectations.
Yeah.
Fear of time wasting.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Not good enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
One of the biggest ones working with guys with anxiety is unknown.
Huh?
Yeah, unknown. Like,
Unknown. Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Right, yeah.
And yeah, the problem is they don't future pace enough in something. They don't go forward enough to say, well, if this did happen, how bad is it?
Totally. And so we know that the more time we spend focusing on something, we do better, right? So the more time and the more effort we spend on a project or whatever we're doing, the more likely we are to succeed. You know what I mean? Like if we're doing, and as Steve was talking about before, if we're juggling 10 different plates, we're worrying about work and then we're at home and then we're doing this and that, we're all over the joint, we end up doing a pretty shit job. Like I don't believe in multitasking. It's just you're doing multiple things poorly, right? That's what happens. Let's be honest, who here is the dude that can actually multitask? It's like none of us can. Then you know what's really funny about that is we know that we can't multitask. However, let's say we have 10 units here, right? Once again, total of 10. How many of these units of focus that we have, these are 10 units of focus, how many of these units do you think that we spend on a day-to-day worrying about uncertainty, insufficiency, time wasting, outcomes, fear, and not meeting expectations?
Too many.
8? Let's call it 8. Right? We have just effectively fucked ourselves up right from the get-go because we're now only putting 20% of our total theoretical focus into actually doing the thing. You see, what happens in terms of uncertainty, insufficiency, getting the outcome that you want, things going wrong, all this fear-based stuff, the thing that actually leads that failure to happen, because that's what it really is in the end of the day. It's a fear of failure, it's a feeling of hurt, it's a feeling of damage or loss. The thing that actually drives whether we win or lose is what? Now, it's our action, what we're doing in this very moment, here and now. And yet here's our stupid little brains, our little monkey brains, thinking it's a great idea to worry about this shit. And this is why we self-sabotage. It's pretty funny, isn't it? We like to think that we're pretty clever as humans, but we do a lot of dumb shit. And so the more that we think in the future, the less likely that we are to succeed. And that's why when we get into things like the flow state and we can stay in flow, why we become so fucking successful, because we're living totally in the now. And so if we look at what anxiety is when we are living in the now right now. We are presently in the now, and the only time that we will ever be is in the now. I know it's a trippy thought to think on that, right? But the only time that we'll ever be on is in the now. But our brain is living in the future. Our mind is living in the future. Our present body is in the now, but our mind's in the future. And we create this gap. And this is effectively the anxiety gap. This gap here, when there's a difference between where our physical body is living and where our mind is living, this creates anxiety, this creates tension, this creates friction. And then from this anxiety gap, we actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're worried about failing on a call. We're worried about not meeting expectations. We're worried about being insufficient. And then what we do is we do every single thing we can in order to make ourselves fail, to make ourselves insufficient and not meet expectations, because we're not focusing on the only thing that we're doing. We're not focusing on what we're doing right now. If we're on a sales call and we're talking with somebody, we're worried about what they're going to say or whether we're going to get the close or not whether we're actually having a great conversation with this person. And the biggest thing that I learned is that if we want to be successful in anything, if you want to be successful in marketing, you want to be successful in sales, product, leadership, anything, you need to be ultimately present in the moment in whatever you're doing. Whatever we are doing, we always need to be super, super present. I mean, that's the whole thing with charisma. Who's ever had a conversation with someone before and you're like, fuck, this dude's just like listening to me like really well. Like I really like them. the whole thing, being more charismatic is actually really, really easy. And it comes down to this. Number one, stop fucking thinking about yourself. And number two, just start thinking about them. And start living in this moment about thinking about exactly what they're saying and being totally present with them. Because if you can nail that, you will be ultimately charismatic. If we get social anxiety, right? Social anxiety. I used to get that fucking bad. I used to be really fucking awkward. I used to think I was retarded when I was a kid. I was like, there's something wrong with me because I just can't communicate with people. I just don't get how to do this. And I was always stuttering my words, always playing back on things that I should have said or future pacing things that I should say in certain situations that funnily enough never happened, right? Because it's all make believe. And so when I learned that I actually had to just start being in the moment and listen to people and actually start being in the present, all of a sudden the anxiety goes away. So if we want to, going back right the way to the start, if we want to be more successful with fat loss, if we want to be more successful with anything, it's not just fat loss. Fat loss is just merely an example, right? Most of us do not have the level of success that we wish that we would have because it comes down to our nervous system, comes down to our self-worth, because we start self-sacrificing, we start judging, we start going to substances, and because we start living in the future and not in the now. So if ultimately we want to be more successful at anything, if you want to lose weight, if you want to gain muscle, if you want to be more successful in anything at all, bang more chicks, have more fun, all you got to do is you got to start living in the now, stop judging, show yourself a bit more love, put yourself first, and stop doing bags. It's pretty easy, huh? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got something out of it and you want to learn more, click the link below or type in High Performance Conversations with James Cant and you'll be able to check out all the podcasts that we've done. We cover a stack of different topics, everything from getting your mojo back, overcoming anxiety, self-doubt, self-esteem, and learning from some of the industries and some of the world's top performers in both business and in health. Look forward to having you on there.